contributing writer to Forbes. You've probably seen her name in Forbes a few times. And I have to say, the one thing that she does better than anybody is she's just really good at connecting the dots of why things happen and how you can look at history to see the future. And she's just no BS. I mean, she's a straight talker and doesn't talk over people's heads or anything and get all like woo-woo about stuff. I mean, she's very down to earth. So anyway, I'm happy to present Mary and welcome her, please.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, everyone. So for the last 30 years, as Sue said, I have been working in the world of trends and change, and I know from that work that if you train your focus on change, you can catch these cultural waves. So now, with the first click, we're going to see if the technology works here. All right, so change. Change is never ending, it seems, and changes can be just massive and hard to fathom. Change can be revolutionary, it can be uniting, it can be infuriating and tragic and filled with loss and confusion. Change is universal. It is also chaotic at times, and change is also part of our natural world, and it is also definitely inevitable. So change, because it is so fundamental to our physical reality, we don't really think about change all that much. Even though time is passing and we know that change takes place, we aren't always thinking about the shifts and changes that are part of that and how it may inevitably affect us. We sometimes can look back over time and we can notice change, how it affected us, or when it's something really massive that we all experience together, some global event like the economic meltdown that's been rippling around the world for the last decade. Or we notice it when it affects us personally in some very significant way. But for the most part, we just don't really think about change. And sometimes it's because we just really don't want to, particularly about our business, because it is this ephemeral, transitory phenomenon that is really hard to get your arms around. It's hard to pin down, and it's hard to decide how to use change. However, I suggest that you ignore change at your peril. You have to think of it as critical data. Is it an indicator of something that it's really important that's happening in the culture that you need to pay attention to? And in very practical terms, it can mean the life or death of a business, and sometimes a very slow death. Blockbuster ignored the changes in consumer demand that were driving the growth at Netflix. Kodak was eclipsed by digital cameras and then outdone by smartphones. Record stores were wiped out by a device that can fit in your pocket, and then of course iTunes. And want ads or classifieds were done in by a nonprofit, Craigslist. So the business graveyard is littered with these brands and companies that failed to pay attention to change and respond to it. So how did these big brands, how did they not see what was coming? I think that the pace of life has a lot to do with that. That as time passes, there are so many elements that we need to watch for and pay attention to. They're often just outside of our view. They're not necessarily within our category or our business or even our geography. But it is that pace of life that can be just dizzying. And it's become a crisis of living and a crisis of business. So how do you manage? How do you manage with all of this noise, continuing demands on our attention? In the US, 27% of people actively avoided watching the news after the election. It was just too much. So moreover, how do we position ourselves to capitalize on change? Many organizations just pay attention to change management, meaning they'll manage change once it's happened or something that they can prepare for. But I think there's something much more important, and it's about recognizing change. This is an underappreciated and not even measured indicator. And it focuses on the customer, the culture, and external forces that offer us hints and clues about what's coming our way. So I want to change how you look at change so that you can avoid being swamped by one of these massive waves that's coming your direction, to form a more forward-looking, progressive point of view and a new awareness, and flex a different sort of analytic muscle, one that takes into account a much more holistic and broader point of view. And if you alter your perspective in this way, it will improve your business. Right, so how do we do this? So I'm going to talk through 3 examples, one really big one that will help explain the dynamics and the complexity of change. And we're going to look at a lot of adjacent issues that are what's important to watch for. All right? So we're going to start here. A topic on many people's minds is politics, and particularly what happened in America. How did it happen? Many people, of course, are still asking that very thing. But we're going to look at the dynamics, and I'm going to take a particular look at history leading up to today of how many changes took place over time to lead us to where we are now. And then I'm going to talk about how that can affect us globally as well, how that change is something that's universal that we all experience. All right, we're starting here. Identity politics are born. This is a massive generation post-World War II baby boom that is now being educated in numbers that America has never seen. They begin to question everything. They look at the world and they see what's wrong. They want to change civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, what they see as an unjust war. This is a rallying cry for a generation. They are questioning authority. The 70s. Investigative journalism is given a new name and a new fame, particularly around the Watergate scandal. This defines an entire area and and is being resurrected right now because of current events. 70s also is where a slow economic decline begins. This quote, adjusted for inflation, average salaries have actually dropped since the early 70s, while hours for full-time workers have steadily climbed. Right? That means you're working longer hours for less money. When it's temporary, you can live with it. But this continued for decades. Compounded over time, this has a toxic effect, and we'll see more of what that wrought. The 80s, this is the birth of right-wing radio, largely because in 1987, the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, stopped enforcing what was referred to as the Fairness Doctrine. This has required radio stations and broadcasters to present an objective or contrasting views. So without that, any broadcaster could be very specific and pointed about their content, right? So next we will see in the 90s, Rupert Murdoch appoints Roger Ailes to run Fox News, right? And it is meant to be a contrast to CNN, which has been dubbed the Clinton News Network. So you can see the factions are building. There is now a right and a left, very distinct within the media that did not exist before this point. Jumping ahead to the 2000, technology gives a voice to anyone who wants one. Citizen journalists, bloggers, independent journalists, anyone who wants to say whatever they want now has a platform and a megaphone. And the noise begins, right? We all know that. 2008, the meltdown, of course. In that time, in the United States, $16 trillion of household wealth was lost. 8 million jobs were lost. This becomes a societal hole that many people will never be able to climb out of. And at the same time, the country is facing this national, global economic crisis. The world has also flattened right at this point. Many jobs are lost. Many industries are completely changed and will never come back, even though people wanted to. An African-American president is elected. This was completely unheard of. And the Tea Party is formed. So the right wasn't right enough. The Tea Party was formed to be even more right. So people struggling to accept and understand this massive change are doing whatever they can. They're closing ranks. They're protecting themselves. Then we get to 2016, all right? These factions are then, the flames are fanned at this point with factional and fake news, all right? It's aided by Facebook, Russians, hackers, spies, or people just plain old angry at the status quo, right? This new phenomenon that no one had really understood or even been aware of is threatening elections, truth, and democracy. Columbia even stated it like this. It's kind of a mouthful here, so I'm going to read it. But Facebook and Twitter indeed precipitated an unprecedented level of misinformation, creating a media network anchored around Breitbart, the far-right site, developed as a distinct and insulated media system using social media as a backbone to transmit a hyper-partisan perspective to the world. So Twitter and Facebook become these unwitting partners in the further delineation and division of all of these groups. So you end up with people that are ground down. This is a generation now that has had to deal with change and loss, right? And what they feel is a system that doesn't work for them. They're reacting to all of this massive change, giving voice to their fears, and they cast a vote based on anger and uncertainty about what's ahead for them. And a new era is introduced as a result. The president voted in on a populist wave, is shaping up politics and the world. New relationships, new policies. It is a new era in America and in the White House. But of course, these issues are not confined to the United States. A similarly highly complex set of changes built over time throughout many parts of the world that is struggling with just as much change. And I'm going to take something highly complex and condense it into a few slides, so know that I know that. All right, the economy, of course, the same time in 2008, just in the household wealth in the UK was decreased by 8%, 6% reduced in the Euro area, and 5% in Japan. These hardships are then further complicated by high unemployment and painful austerity programs. And you can see on this chart that unemployment, particularly with youth, is still very high. This is the population that is going to begin to foment so much change. Immigration. So what has been dubbed the largest migration of refugees since World War II, this is 66 million people, flood into many parts of the world that are already struggling to maintain an economy that is under stress. There's also a lack of faith in the EU, that how is it that these countries, that these people who are trying to maintain their own lifestyles, they are feeling forgotten. There is this loss of national identity as a result. And terrorism, these horrific events throughout the world rock cities, communities, countries, threatening everything, all right? And it's simultaneously uniting for these communities and divisive. So you end up with this us versus them, all right? This revolt against elites that live in their out-of-touch bubble, right? They become the enemy as citizens demand a return to what they know, what they understand, the way things used to be, right? And the candidates fan those flames as well. Farage with "We want our country back." Trump with "Make America Great Again." Le Pen with "This is our country and choose France." So these slogans, they continue to stoke this fire of what people are wishing for, that all the complexity and fear they're feeling will go away. They believe that that politics, that government is broken. There's no reason for them to trust it. They feel overlooked and forgotten when in favor of people that are not like them. So I wanted to look a little bit closer at populism and nationalism. What is truly driving these potent ideologies? So I put this through the analytic platform that I've created, and these values are what are driving these two areas. Populism, the first value is justice. This is about right and wrong. What is true, what I understand, what I believe is right. Nationalism, motivated by freedom, of course, freedom from outside interference, people that are not like me, something that is too much about them. I want these people that support this want to be in control. They want freedom from outside control. So, big relief for many around the election of Macron. Many were disappointed, of course, but relieved to see this young president reversed this tide into nationalism and protectionism. Brexit in the UK, Trump in America were a wake-up call for many. All right, big topic. They're not all going to be like this. But this is a really interesting way to think about change. When you look back over time, right, you can see changes that manifest and continue to compound and lead us to where we are now. So in that same way, not necessarily this dramatic, but in that same way, you can keep an eye on your own brands, your own industry, your own categories by tracking those building blocks of change over time. And even if it doesn't make sense right now, it will help you understand when the next change happens. You'll be able to put it in context. All right? Next one's really easy. Totally different spot on the societal spectrum. We're going to talk about breakfast. All right? How has breakfast changed? One of the big components of breakfast has always been cereal. And the global business is huge. It's $43 billion. But even at that size, in 15 years, it's fallen 30%. So across Europe and North America, cereal consumption is in decline. And it's not, of course, that people suddenly decided to stop eating cereal. There were many changes that impacted our desire about what kind of foods we consume. All right. I wanted to bring up this quote because many of you may have seen it. Mintel's report recently reported that millennials just couldn't be bothered with cereal because they had to clean up a bowl and a spoon. And while that's kind of a funny headline, it's so much more than that. There are so many different aspects of what took place in the culture that brought about this shift. All right, changes first in our attitudes about health. Low carb started this slide. The low carb trend was huge. It then morphed into paleo diets and gluten-free. We had much better research emerge recently around how it isn't actually fat that makes us fat, which we all thought, but it's actually sugar. So now sugar is the new villain, and cereal is absolutely loaded with it, all right? And politics tried to get into the fray about how much sugar we were going to consume. In the United States, they tried to ban Big Gulps, you know, those 48-ounce cups of soda, to try and ban those. And of course, that didn't work. Consumers revolted against that. They want their sugar. Allergens, sensitivities to foods like gluten, nuts, dairy began to fracture family meals all over the day, and particularly breakfast. The 70s Whole Foods movement came back to life with new energy around trends that had more prominence now. Sustainability, waste, labels, processed foods. So these notions about health began to change how we think about what we want to consume in that day part. Indulgence, right? The US finally caught up with the rest of the world in understanding what a good cup of coffee tastes like. So they began to spend more time in a coffee house. It became what's referred to as a third place. It also became where you went in the morning before you went to work. So changed the place where particularly Americans were going to have that morning meal. And just a little tidbit that consumers around the globe drank 155 million 60-kilogram bags of coffee. So that's a steady increase around the world since 2012. A lot of coffee being drunk. Convenience. Spelling error there, sorry. That's supposed to be the intentional pause, when people would take time for meals. Everywhere that's begun to take a hit, right? People are just time crunched. They're trying to find simple and easy solutions. They're stopping somewhere for fast food on their way to the office. They're grabbing bars and bites like this bar I have up there, the RX bar, and they're just skipping that meal altogether. Replacements, smoothies and smoothie bowls. These gorgeous, colorful bowls are now the darlings of Pinterest. And Soylent, which is a meal replacement, of course, was created by a tech nerd, right? Because they can't be bothered with actually real food, that they would step away from their screens to consume. And lifestyle. In the US, the mini meal snack, big surprise, is now a thing. And breakfast is now served all day. So foods that were usually confined to one day part, that's no longer the case. This is a shot of Egg Slut in Los Angeles, where they serve breakfast meals all day long. So This big change is a combination of innovation and disruption. It's come together from all parts of the culture, from society, technology, environment, economy, and politics. So the seeds of change you can see here have happened over many years, and you can see them through a framework like this. Now, ultimately, breakfast is never going away, of course. Cereal, though, that's going to continue to struggle because consumers are now much more engaged in the kinds of foods that they consume, the impact it will have on the environment and climate, and they're looking for clean, protein-rich, gut-healthy foods. Okay, last example here. Retail. Full-on turmoil, full-on tilt. Where is this going to sell out? Where will the bricks fall here? And I think that the changes we'll see, that takes a really surprising shift. All right. Retail began in small communities, right? Main Street, High Street. This is the place where retail was born. This is where we shopped. In the rest of the world, this is a place to walk to. In the US, it's a place you drive to. But this is where businesses were born and thrived. It was the beating heart of every community. The change came in the form of progress and growth. The first enclosed mall, this idea of why not take all the stores and put them in one place. This was invented in Minneapolis in 1956, that long ago, all right? The 60s then saw big box be born, hypermarkets be born, and begin to dominate retail. In fact, dominate these enclosed malls. Then malls were such a success, why not make them bigger and bigger, right? Developers began developing malls in Dubai, in China, America, Canada, complete with these massive aquariums, with ski hills, with surf riding pools, everything around an entertainment experience along with shopping, right? This continues then to put more stress on the small store, the local store, Main Street, High Street. E-commerce then, of course, launched in the 2000s. It's still having a massive impact and will continue to. So just a point here, total retail across the globe reached $22 trillion, up 6%. And of that, e-commerce is 8.7%. So that 8.7% is having a massive effect on retail in general. It's so much so that big boxes are beginning to feel this pinch. Right on the edge, Macy's, JCPenney, Sears, Kmart, Aeropostale, just clinging to life. Jaeger, a brand that has been around forever, just failed in the last year. But now we're starting to see new bricks. These digital-only stores are beginning to open up physical stores, right? Warby Parker, which is now worth more than $1 billion, it's hard to believe, now has 46 locations and getting ready to open 26 more. These are now physical stores they're opening up, small storefronts. Bonobos, this was a digital-only strategy. This brand gained huge success in their deployment of their brand in this manner. They now have begun to open what they're referring to as guide shops, and it has helped propel their business forward as it provides an opportunity for the customer to experience the brand in a physical manner. In the UK, retail parks are becoming more attractive by getting rid of the out-of-town retailers and by bringing in more high street. And Amazon continues to change how we shop, right? They're opening a handful now of physical bookstores, and the irony of that is lost on no one, that they were the ones that wiped out the small bookstore. And they're taking shopping in a completely new direction with their new concept, Amazon Go. This is their AI sensor-based concept that they have developed, where you opt in with your phone and everything you touch and then just walk right back out of the store is deducted from your account. So, population growth, booming economy, e-commerce, mobile shopping, a generation that is digital, all laid the groundwork for retail to shift in the way that it has. But there is one incontrovertible force, and that's people, all right? So never bet against the elements central to who we are, that human condition. So just like how we thought that journalists were going to evaporate, we were never going to see major news organizations ever again. We're never going to read real books again. Retail is going through that same sort of stressful, confusing, expensive flux, right? But it's making its way back by satisfying core consumer values: service, community, and trust. This is what it takes to grow and succeed. Right, so wrapping this up around 5 building blocks of change, because it's tough to recognize change, sometimes when it hasn't even occurred yet. But if you stay alert, if you think about what's changing around you, you won't be caught off guard. So the first one, history, one of my favorite things. You can see that timeline across the top. Dig in here. Use your knowledge of what's happened in the past, what you understand about consumer attitudes, industry trends, what's succeeded, what has failed, and build a foundation that can show how your industry has already changed. You will be better prepared when change comes your direction then next. So track anything that you can identify, even if it doesn't make sense right now. It'll make more sense when something else happens and it won't necessarily feel like a threat. Context. Culture is all about context. Nothing happens on its own. Nothing comes into being on its own. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum. Brands, dictators, pop stars, they all are the result of other things happening around them that make them who they are. And culture, the world that we live in our business world, reflects nature in this way. We live in a dynamic system that is constantly changing, and we all only exist in relationship to everything else around us. So I use a framework like this one to keep track of everything. It's a way to organize information, and I believe that these are the 5 forces that affect the consumer world and the culture, each in turn: society, technology, environment, economy, politics. Use it as a tool to understand the world. Change no longer has any boundaries. It's no longer local. We are no longer confined to a particular part of the world. You can get together with whoever you think like or whatever you think like, and you can change the world in that way. Don't shrug off the obvious or the fringe. This happens to be my favorite area to explore because change comes from absolutely everywhere. Chaos, collapse, growth, innovation, revolution, evolution. Change doesn't have to come at you head on to impact your business in an important way. And watch the fringe. Watch that stuff that's on the early radar, right? Doesn't matter how wacky it is. Just keep track of all of that because it all matters. It all has something to do with what's shifting in the culture. And keep track of what your customers say and customers of your competitors as well. Even if it's complaints, no matter how cranky or how wild it is, they're all signals. So try and connect the dots in what you see there. And values, all right? Values are core drivers of consumer behavior. They drive what we do. And if our needs aren't being met, we will move someplace else where they're better met. Just like these swarms of birds, one bird at the lead moves the whole swarm someplace else. If consumers see a product that better meets their needs, they will move there as well. All right, steps to take. Start to talk, start a conversation. Set aside time, once a month, once a quarter, once a year, where everyone can step outside the cycle that they're in and begin to exchange ideas about what they see happening in the world that's going to affect your business, your clients. Go to school in your client's industry. Build that foundation that I talked about. Review history, what's changed over time that can bring a meaningful foundation to what you know about the businesses that are important to you and your clients. And furthermore, see this as something very natural. Don't judge it. Just pay attention to what's happening, those shifts that are occurring. And remember to learn and observe first, then decide how to act. And leverage your planners. All right, everyone should take part in discussing and exchanging ideas, but your planners have that skill to synthesize information and connect those dots. All right, so I just delivered a ton of information to you. I would like to hear from all of you about how you see the changes happening in your part of the world. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, I invite all the ideas and comments that you have. think we're good. Thank you.